Am I on? I am on. Okay, perfect. I was not anticipating speaking this morning, so you got announcements with me as well. That's a little weird, huh? Well, good morning. If you didn't catch that, I am Pastor Sterling. I'm the elementary pastor here, and I usually hide in the back or do other stuff. I don't know. Rest assured, I enjoy Bridgeview very much so because our kids are some of the best kids I've ever met. And this is a tough week for me because it's the week that I lose my fifth graders to Pastor Tyler. And man, he is getting an incredible class. And I am very jealous, not gonna lie. I need to move some stuff out of my way because I'm gonna move a little bit. Well, before I get into my message this morning, I want to take a little bit more time and highlight, man, Kids Church, because I'm on stage and no one can stop me. So we are having an incredible time in Kids Church. The new room that you have faithfully built for us, it's full. Man, oh man, we are having a blast in there. We have so many kids who have started coming in the last year because they recognize this place not only is fun, but it's a place they get to meet Jesus. How cool is that, guys? And you know what? We've started up Wednesday nights year-round. And if you didn't know that, man, the same time as youth group, the same time as adult classes, we have kids services for your kids. And as the school year is about to start, I am needing some amazing volunteers. Now, these aren't just any volunteers. This isn't a small commitment. I need some people who are willing to sacrifice 9 months of our awesome adult classes so that they can lead our small groups for our kids. Now, if you're thinking, man, that sounds like an awesome time, but I don't know how to do that, don't worry, I can teach you. It's super simple, because kids don't know when you're doing it wrong anyway. But I truly believe that it's not how we start, but how we finish that matters. And our kids have a fantastic starting point. And I need a few of you to come along and guide them to a finish that is far beyond anything we can imagine. So if you're feeling, man, you know what? I want to do this. I want to be a small group leader on Wednesday nights for kids. Come talk to me. Because I need you. And more so than that, because our kids are coming hungry for learning about God. And you can be the voice of God in their life this week, this school year. I still remember things from Kids Church that I'll never forget. That's why I'm a kids pastor, actually. It's a big deal. And you can be that person. So if that's you, if you're feeling that, if you're not feeling that, pray about it. Seriously, come on. At least do that for me, please. Come talk to me because I would love to have you on my team. Well, anyway, let's get going with our message today. This is actually a sequel to a message Pastor Tyler preached on June 13th. If you weren't there for it, he talked about temples. And I loved it so much, I was like, well, I got to follow up on that. I want to go a little deeper because it was so good. If you haven't listened to it, again, June 13th, you can find it on our website. Speaking of which, welcome people watching online. We're glad you're here. We love you, and we're so thankful for you for tuning in. Also, I keep forgetting stuff. Oh, my goodness. Pastor Joe was supposed to preach today, but he is sick. Keep him in your prayers. He has, like, the flu or something. It's gross. He texted me yesterday. He's like, dude, I haven't been out of bed in 24 hours. I can't. I'm like, that's wise. Okay, yes. So keep him in your prayers. He will be here to preach in 2 weeks then. And yeah, so thank you, Nate, for filling in also, man. Great job, wherever you are. My man. Anyway, so this is a sequel to the temples, but today we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about the mark of a priest, or the mark of the priest. We are going to talk about how there are, I see Tyler smiling, I like it. We are nerds, if you didn't catch that. We just geek out in the office over stuff like this. So anyway, we're going to talk about priests in the Bible and how that fits in with the temple. So does anyone remember how Pastor Tyler started his message? What was the first temple? Anyone remember? Shout it out. Garden of Eden. Fantastic. A temple is a place where heaven and earth intersect, where man can interact with the divine. So, where did we end? What is the current temple? Anyone? Sephora, you don't count. You're married to him. Anyone else remember? What she said. Perfect. Us, we are now the temple. The Holy Spirit dwells within us. We are the temple of God to the world. So if you missed out on that, or if you're like, dude, what are you even talking about? Go back and listen to it, because it is seriously a great, great sermon and a phenomenal illustration of what the temple is. So we are going to look through the biblical narrative today. Also, I use a lot of fancy big words because I'm a nerd. These things are real events. These are real people. Don't ever assume when I say a biblical character that I'm talking about a fantasy. I'm talking about a real thing. All right, caveats all aside. Let's talk about temples. Temples need two things. Temples need a deity that they worship, in our case a real one, in other cases a false one, and temples need priests. Priests work and care for the temple. They keep the temple running. If you've ever been in a church that is dirty, or been here on a Wednesday night at 9 o'clock, you know the need for things to be upkept. Because if we just left it like that, then you're coming in here to cups all over, you're coming in here to donut crumbs in the carpet. That's one example. But the other thing that they do is they work and keep it. They work for the people. So we're going to talk all about that today. But before we begin, actually as we begin, I don't know why I said that, we're going to talk about one temple that Tyler left out. And I encouraged him to put it in there, and he said, I don't have time. And I said, that is fair, because you're packing a lot in there. We're going to talk about a temple that some of you might not know was a temple. This temple is found in Genesis 11, and it is, well, we'll get to it, okay? Here we go. If we open up our Bibles to Genesis 11, verse 1, I think I have it on the screen, but I also put an autocorrector through and then copied from my notes, and it definitely autocorrected some of the words. So if you're like, that doesn't make sense, yeah, Microsoft Word doesn't make sense. Here we go. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, come, let's make bricks and bake them. Then they used the brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. They said to each other, come, let us build for ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, if as one people speaking in one tongue, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other. So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it is called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. Well, that was loud. Babel is actually a temple. Now, the important distinction here, this is not a temple of God. This is a temple of man. Look at me, right? That my name might not be forgotten. The temple of Babel pops up throughout the Bible all over the place in key moments. One of my frustrations with translations of the Bible is the fact that the word Babel is translated as Babel. It's a Hebrew word, it means Babel. And in other places, it's translated as Babylon. If you've ever read about a city called Babylon in the Bible, the Hebrew word is Babel. It's the same place. Babel is one of the oldest cities in the world. And it becomes the archetype for evil in the Bible. That's the fancy word that means it becomes evil in the Bible. Like, it's the representation. If something's from Babylon, if something's going on in Babylon, you are in the place of evil. You are in the temple of sin, as opposed to being in the temple of God. So there's two choices you have by the end of Genesis 11. Do you serve Babel? Do you serve God? Do you serve man and your own desires? Or do you serve God and his desires? We see Babel be taken into the story of the exile, where the Israelite people are literally ripped from their homes and brought to there to live in this place of sin as punishment for their sins. And then we see it continue on after its destruction. Babylon was destroyed by the Persians. It was taken out. And then Peter writes a letter in 1 Peter and 2 Peter, and he says, greetings from Babylon. Here's the thing, Peter was in Rome. Babylon has now begun to mean greetings from the world. Greetings from a place of sin. Greeting from the place that is opposite of God. And we find it in Revelation again in the Babylon the Great, which is the headquarters of all evil in the world. We're dealing with something that is physical and metaphorical. That's important because here's the deal. I'm trying to get you to the point to recognize today you have a choice. You can belong to the temple of God, or you can belong to the temple of man. And one of those is better than the other. So, temples have two things: a deity, in this case, Yahweh, the God of Israel, or a deity, your wants and selfish ambition. But they also have a priest. Priests work and keep. So, the priests of Yahweh work and keep the temple of Yahweh. The priests of man seek their own inhibition, their own desires. And we have a fun, well, I think it's fun, or we'll see. A fun glimpse of this happening throughout the line of the priests. How many of you guys know that there were priests in the Old Testament? Right? Now, don't picture like a priest, like a Catholic priest wearing the black robes and all that. These people were like covered in blood. This is welcome to what we would consider barbaric thought processes here. We're talking sacrifices. We're talking being in charge of executions. We're talking brutal stuff. But these priests actually are supposed to lead us to God. So let's look at the very first act of the very first priest of Israel. We're going to jump to Exodus 32. You might recognize this story as the golden calf. Now, when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down the mountain, the people assembled around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who will go before us. For this Moses, the man who brought us up from Egypt, we don't know what happened to him." He's been gone like 40, 50 days at this point. Aaron said to them, "Tear off the gold rings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people tore off their gold rings, which were in their ears, and brought them to Aaron. Then he took the gold from their hands and fashioned it with an engraving tool and made it into a cast metal calf. And they said, "This is your God, Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." Now when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of it. This is the high priest. He built an altar in front of it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." So the next day they got up early and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and got up to engage in lewd behavior. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Go down at once, for the people whom you have brought from the land of Egypt have behaved corruptly. They have quickly turned aside from the way which I commanded them. They have made for themselves a metal calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it, saying, 'This is your God, Israel, who brought you from the land of Egypt.'" Okay. Let's pause and reflect. How does this relate to Babel? Well, Aaron had a choice to make. The Israelites would have killed him if he said no. He chose his own skin. I get that. I don't agree with it. I get it. I think you guys do too. Aaron, on his first big assignment as a high priest, however, completely fails and misses the mark. So what is a priest? Maybe we need to define that. I've said the job of the priest works and keeps the temple. But the priest should also be the person who points people to God. They are the bridge. We call them mediators or intercessors. When you look at a priest in the Old Testament, you're not looking at a dude. You're looking at a representative of God himself among you. So for Aaron, on his first day as high priest, well, his 50th day, but his first action, to instead break the covenant with God and build an idol, means that we're in for a bumpy ride with our priests. And in fact, we get that the rest of the story. The priests are never painted in a positive light, except for like 2 times, when they do something that's actually sensical. From beyond that, the priests mess up. So why is this story in here? Why do we learn that Aaron, on his first day, messes up? To understand that, we actually have to understand the Genesis story a little more. So if a priest serves a deity, let's talk about that deity. And to do that, let's go back to the first temple. Don't worry, I'm throwing up on the wall here throwing spaghetti on the wall here. Why did I say throwing up? What a bad analogy. I'm throwing spaghetti on the wall here, and then we're going to weave it all together, okay, guys? So, jeez. You can tell I work with kids. So, let's highlight in that biblical story, the story of the golden calf, 2 words, and then pull them out of Genesis. The words, see, the people saw that Moses was delayed, and then Aaron took the golden reins stuff and threw it in the fire. Does anyone know of a time when someone else see and took in the Bible in Genesis? Say it again? Achan. Okay, that's in Numbers. But, huh? The apple. Very good. Eve. Eve sees an apple. Well, we'll talk about that too. And takes it, right? And that's the story of the fall. So here's the deal. In Eden, we have 2 priests, Adam and Eve. They were there to work and keep Eden. They were making it right. They were caring for the animals. They were maintaining the place. Until one day, something happens. We all know this story. There's a serpent. And if you listen to Pastor Steve's supernatural thing, you know it's not a snake. It's a deity thing. This is where the spirit and the physical meet. So let's read that story real quick, and then if you're like, well, what are we talking about? We're about to get there. Don't worry, I promise. Now the serpent was more cunning than any animal of the field which the Lord God had made, and he said to the woman, has God said, you shall not eat from the tree of the gardens? The woman said to the serpent, from the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but not from the one in the center of the garden. God has said, don't eat it or touch it, or you will die. The serpent said to the woman, you won't die. For God knows that the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will become like God, knowing good and evil. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was delightful to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise, she took some of its fruit and ate it. And she also gave some to her husband, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together to make waist coverings. Eve sees the fruit, and she takes it. This is the first time these 2 words are used in this order, and it happens time and time and time again, leading all the way up to Moses. Sorry, Aaron. I keep saying Moses. Let's break this down a little bit. The tree of knowledge of good and evil that we encounter in the garden is a representation. I don't think it was an apple that made humans have war and fight famine and stuff. I think it was this. God put a tree in the center of the garden and gave Eve a choice. Will you listen to my voice and take hold of my wisdom, or will you take hold of your own wisdom and grab on to knowledge of good and evil? Here's the thing. We read in this, Eve sees that the tree is good. She sees that there is good in it. It never mentions that she sees that it is bad. The Hebrew words here is tov for good and ra for bad. And it doesn't pop up with ra until after Eve eats the fruit. She does not recognize the bad that is in there. She only sees the good because she has learned wisdom from God. How many of you guys remember a time when God sees that something is good? You know, a couple pages back on day 1. Hey, light's good. Hey, land is good. Hey, people are good. Eve has learned from God. She has the wisdom of God. And as long as she operates within that, she is a priest of God. Until she is given a choice to take, in her own way, her own wisdom, a step away from God. She sees that the tree is desirable for making one wise. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is the test of wisdom. Whose wisdom will you rely on? God's or man's? Are you belonging to the temple of God or the temple of Babel? Eve takes of her own wisdom. Says, God, you said I'll die. I'm going to say, I'm not going to die. And you know what? She was right. She didn't die that day, physically. but she was cut off from all life. Eve sees, which is the word ra'ah, and takes, lakak. And every time these words pop up, from here until the end of the Torah, they are a test. When someone sees, they have a choice to make. A few examples: Abraham and Hagar. If you know this story, you know that it is a terrible story. Abraham gets promised a son by God in chapter 15 of Genesis. Come chapter 16, it still hasn't happened. Who knows how long that was? A few years, I don't know. And Sarah gets upset and says, you know what, Abraham, look upon my slave girl, Hagar. And Abraham looks and sees that she is suitable for childbearing. A terrible way to talk about a human being. That's what she's suitable for? That's it? This is a slave they own. This is not good. This is already oppressing other people. So Abraham takes her into his bed. And they conceive Ishmael, and there's this whole thing where, well, the next line is, when Sarah sees what Hagar has become, meaning loved, she takes action against her. So, fun stuff, right? These are supposed to be heroes. Abraham fails the test. He sees that God has a plan for him. In his wisdom, God says, you will have a son. And he's so blinded by the fact that he's 100 years old that he's like, you know what? Hagar's looking pretty good today. I think that's probably how this is going to happen. This is how I'll get my son. He chooses his own wisdom over God's. But Abraham does have a redemption. Abraham, years later, has a son. His name's Isaac, by Sarah. It's a big deal. This is the son of promise. And God wakes him up and says, hey, I want you to sacrifice your son. I'll be real with you. If God told me to do that, I wouldn't. Plain and simple. Abraham has a few more years than me. Abraham gets up early that morning and sets out for the land of Moriah, where God told him to go. And when he sees the mountain in Moriah, Ra'ah, he takes Lakak, his son, and lays him on the altar, takes the knife in his hand, and is about to slay his son. When he hears a voice, don't do it. Abraham, stop. And he stops, thankfully, because otherwise we would have a much different God. And God says to him, now I know that you have put your faith in me. Now I know you've passed the test. You have chosen my wisdom over yours, even when it didn't make sense, even when it went against what you want. Abraham wanted nothing more than a son. But his willingness to give it back to God, to give him back to God, passed this test. Where Eve failed, Abraham finally succeeds. Although there were 6 other times where Abraham failed. 7's kind of a big number because there's also 7 in his great-grandkids. 7 times, Abraham's great-grandkids, which are the 12 sons of Jacob, see something and take something, and it's not good. They see Joseph coming, and they take him and throw him in a pit. Sweet. Great brothers, right? Except for Reuben, who is like, hey guys, I know you're saying we should kill him, let's just throw him in a pit. All right, good on you, Reuben. But they see and take him. And then it just keeps happening to Joseph. Potiphar sees that he is a good worker, so he takes him to be placed over his whole house. Potiphar's wife sees that he is handsome, so she takes hold of his robe. Potiphar has him thrown in prison, and the jailer sees that he is loyal. He is trustworthy, so he takes him to be over the prison. The Pharaoh sees that God is with him, so he takes off his signet ring to place it on his hand. Time after time, people see and take, using their own wisdom or God's own wisdom. Pharaoh passes the test, actually. It's kind of a crazy deal, because the next Pharaoh doesn't. But we finally get to a point where Joseph now sees. He sees his brothers coming back after years of famine, looking for food. You know what he does? He takes his brother Simeon and throws him in a pit. Joseph failed the test. And years later, after Simeon's been rotting in this pit, Jacob finally sends the rest of his sons back. And when Joseph sees his brother Benjamin, his full-blood brother, his only full-blood brother, he breaks down. He starts crying. And instead of taking him for himself, he takes from his own table a feast for his brothers. And Joseph realizes that everything that has happened has been because God and his wisdom have been in control. Joseph redeems himself and passes the test. Then we see a Pharaoh who sees that the Hebrew people are numerous and says, let us in our wisdom deal with this problem. So he takes the firstborn babies, throws them in the Nile. If you've ever wondered, hey, what's up with the plagues? Why is the last one the death of the firstborn? Direct, hey, you killed my firstborn, I kill yours. Oh, but if you've ever wondered, why are the Egyptians oppressing the Israelites? It's because Hagar was an Egyptian slave oppressed by who would become the Israelites. It's all a weave. So, now the Israelites are oppressed and God sees and hears their cries. And he takes Moses to be his representative to him. And we know the story of the Exodus. There's many miracles, many stuff happens. And they leave and they arrive at Mount Sinai, where they have a marriage celebration between them and God. They are now one with their God. And they are to be a kingdom of priests to the whole world. And they build an idol and do lewd things, basically on their wedding night. They failed the test. And if that's where the story ended, the Bible would stink, man. But it's not where the story ends. We continue in chapter 32 of Exodus to find this. The Lord said to Moses, this is one of those autocorrects, I have seen these people, and behold, they are obstinate people. They're stiff-necked. They're dumb. So now leave me alone, that my anger will burn against them, and I might destroy them. And I will make you into a great nation. I have seen these people. Now let me take you. Moses doesn't know it, but he's just entered into the biggest test yet. And Moses then pleads with the Lord his God and says, Lord, why does your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out from Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? He keeps going on to say, the Egyptians, you don't want them to say, look what their God did. He brought them out there just to kill them. He reminds God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and the times they passed the test. He shows God, look, these people, yes, are bad. But eventually, they pass the test. And it says God relents. He turns away. And then, a little bit later in the chapter, Moses does something that proves to God that Moses has passed the test. He says, God, don't punish them for their sin. But if you must punish them, punish me in their place. Moses could have been the start. He could have been the new Abraham. And instead, he says, no. Put me in their place. He could have had fame. He could have had power. He could have been everything. And instead he says, I'll lose it all if it means that you, God, remain glorified. Moses shows us the heart of a true priest. The actions of the priest must glorify God, whether you serve God or yourself. There is no in between. There is no gray area. There is some black and white here. One of my favorite, well, least favorite, but favorite quotes, because it's convicting, comes from a dear mentor of mine named Adam. 99% obedience is 100% disobedience. God, you can have it all except for this little bit. I reserved that for me. What is a priest? A priest is someone who glorifies their deity, no matter the cost. Our deity is so much greater than our desires. Our God is so much greater than our selfish ambitions. And when we, as priests of God, who have accepted his salvation through Christ Jesus, have become his temple, stoop down to the ground to reach for our own selfish desires, we spit in the face of God. And if that seems harsh, dude, read Habakkuk, read the other, Hosea. He doesn't have nice words about it. He calls us some names. But Moses gets the test right. Moses acts like a true priest. And so the rest of the book of Exodus is all about, hey, build me a dwelling place, a tabernacle, a tent. And that's where we will encounter each other. Build me a proto-temple. So he gets all of the measurements, all this stuff. It's kind of crazy. He's in heaven looking at this stuff. It's a really cool story. But it can seem really boring because it's all just a bunch of lists. But if you really think about what's going on, man, awesome stuff. Until he builds it all, and in the very last chapter, the very last verse of Exodus, it says, and they finished the work 1 year to the day from getting to Sinai, and Moses and the priests could not enter it. A year's worth of work, and they're stuck on the outside? What? Enter the problem of sin. Even though we are priests, we mess up, don't we? Absolutely. Anyone who says differently is absolutely lying, unless it's Jesus, and then I'll believe him. Enter the gray into our black and white problem of priests. We can't do it. We'll never be perfect enough. Our actions will never 100% glorify God. It's a harsh reality. It's a bummer. And you know what? God looked past it and said, all right, here's the book of Leviticus. Some of y'all how many of you guys have ever tried to read through the Bible and you get like to Exodus and you're like, oh, this tabernacle stuff. And if you make it through that, you get to Leviticus and you're like, do I keep going? Oh, what if I just jump to Numbers where the story continues, huh? Dude, Leviticus might be my favorite book because I'm a nerd and I read a really good commentary on it that changed my life. Leviticus details how the priests would make themselves holy to then make the people holy so that this temple where God and man can meet can be accessed by man. Because otherwise, we can't be in the same presence as God. We do not exist in the same space as God. So we get all these fun little things like festivals and feasts and sacrifice rules. We get a whole lot of stuff about what the high priest would wear. I'm talking a ton of stuff. This dude was immaculate. When you saw the high priest, he was glowing because of all the gold and all the shiny stones. He was supposed to represent God to you. When you looked at the high priest, it's like you were looking at God. A little fun tidbit that plays into the name of this series, or this sermon, is he would actually have like not a crown, but like a headband on with a gold plate on it. That was the brightest thing on there. And on it said, of Yahweh, or dedicated to God. You didn't know Yahweh is the name of our God. Yeah, we call him God because it's more respectful. This is the mark of the priest. And in fact, the other priests all had other types of things like this that they would wear on their wrist or their forehead. And the entire kingdom of Israel had to wear this thing called the Shema, which is a prayer that comes from the book of Deuteronomy. They wore it on their wrist or on their forehead. And it was what set them apart to be the people of God. This is what they dwelled on day and night. They were supposed to wake up and say it, go to bed and say it, and in between say it a ton of times too. The mark of the priest is this: the constant effort to dwell in the presence of God and make his name glorified. There's another mark in the Bible that rhymes with priest. And it's exactly what John was getting at when he wrote his Revelation. And he said, there is a mark of the beast, a mark of Babylon, a mark of human desires. You won't be able to buy or sell without it. It's a mark of oppression, a mark that seeks to hurt others, to gain yourself. Heavy stuff, right? Leviticus holds scary truths in it. But it doesn't leave us wallowing in darkness. It doesn't leave us wavering between the mark of the priest or the mark of the beast. It leaves us with this. On the 7th day of the 7th month, we celebrate Yom Kippur. Have you ever seen that on your calendar? It's a Jewish holiday. It is the Jewish holiday. It is the Day of Atonement. And on this day, all Israel would gather together at the temple. The high priest would put on his fancy clothes. He'd stand up before the people and he'd bring forth 2 lambs. And on these lambs, they would throw lots, meaning they'd flip a coin basically, but they didn't have coins, whatever they had, I don't know. And one would be selected to be what becomes the scapegoat. If you've ever heard that term, it comes from this goat because the high priest would put his hand on the goat's head, confess all of the sins of Israel over it, and then they'd shoo it out into the wilderness. And it would take the punishment for their sin. Now, they weren't allowed to kill it. They probably just went and had a normal life. But when it left, the people were left without sin. And then comes the important part. The second goat wasn't so lucky. He would be slaughtered, sacrificed, his blood caught in a bowl. And then, and this is the grossest part, I remember the first time I heard this, I was in a St. Cloud State University basement listening to a Hebrew Bible teacher, and it was gross because he talks about how big old urn of blood, how many of you guys just have that laying around? Dip your finger in it, fling it into the crowd. Dip your finger in it, fling it into the crowd. It's called sprinkling. You do it 7 times because 7's important. And this would put the blood of an innocent lamb on you. Barbaric, disgusting, right? So is sin. And this is the cost. And then the high priest would do what he only gets to do once a year. He'd go behind the veil in the temple, into the Holy of Holies, a place where God sits. And he'd bring in the blood of this lamb, this innocent lamb. And the rest he'd sprinkle on the altar. And it would rise to heaven. It was a gift of ascension. And in heaven, God would look at it and see its pure spotlessness, its innocence. And it would take our place. The whole sacrificial system is set up because, here's the deal, sin has a cost, and it is death, and it is your death. And this covered, didn't pay it, but it covered it. And so God would see this lamb, and instead, when he looks at you seeing your sinfulness, he would see a spotless lamb, something pure, something innocent. And this tradition carried on, temple after temple, year after year, high priest after high priest, until we get to one of the high priests who wasn't too good. And he brings 2 lambs for a Roman governor. One named Jesus of Nazareth, and one named Jesus Barabbas. And the people choose to send their sin out into the wilderness and kill their spotless lamb. They didn't know what they were doing that day. They didn't recognize that they were going through the Day of Atonement. Heaven knew, and hell felt it. Because our spotless lamb saw us, and instead of seeing his chance to rule over us, took our sin and death upon himself and passed the test. More so than anyone could have ever done it. And he climbed up on that tree and he died in our place. And he ascended into heaven. And now when Father God sees you, he sees his Son in your place. Your debt's been paid, far more than any lamb could cover. Who do you serve? As the band comes up this morning, who do you serve? Which temple are you choosing to be a part of? Because God has made a way for you to be his priests forever and ever. Revelation 5:10 says he has made us a kingdom of priests forever and ever unto the Lord. Hey, there it is. Or you can choose Babylon. You can choose the mark of the beast. To seek your own selfish ambition in place of God's righteous love. If you've made that choice already, you know it. If you've accepted the sacrifice of Jesus in your place as your spotless atoning lamb, I'm going to be real with you. It doesn't matter what you do. You've made your choice. You've passed the test. Now, is it honoring to go on sinning so that grace may increase? Paul would say no. He'd probably call you an idiot. He's nice with his words. But if you haven't made that choice yet, if you're still wavering between which temple you serve in, today's your day. Because there is a very real thing that all of us go through called death. And our death can either be to pay our cost of sin, or it can be to enter into life with Jesus forever. If you've never had that chance, if you've never made that choice, today could be your day. So ask yourself, what do you see right now? What are you taking right now? Will you be like Eve and choose your own wisdom over God's? Or will you be like Moses, be like Jesus, and glorify your God at the sacrifice of your wants and your desires? I'm not saying God's going to make you have a terrible life. But I am saying that God has a plan for your life. And it doesn't look like your life. But it is full of glory and honor for our God. That's what we were created to do. It's what we were created to be. Sounds like goodness of God. What a perfect song for this. Think about it. And if you don't like the answer, today's your day to make it right. To say, God, I believe in you and I want to be your priest. I want to be serving you for all my days. Amen, play.
Your voice, you have led me through the fire, some darkest nights. You are close like no other. Known you as a father, known you as a friend, and I have lived in the goodness of God. Yeah. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so good. Every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. Your goodness is running after me. Your goodness is running after me. My life laid is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. My life laid down, surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. Every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God.
If you're like me, you're thinking, man, that was a downer. I don't know who that message was for. God totally changed my message yesterday because he knew that someone needed to hear it. And if that's you, and if you made the choice to enter into a relationship with God, to enter into his covenant, to be his priest in his temple, heaven is roaring right now with praise for God and excitement for you because God has just found a lost child. As his temple, as his priests, you're given a great honor and a great joy. I want to look at, as we say goodbye today, the words of a group of Levites. Now, if you don't know what Levites are where the priests came from, their tribe, and they were the ones who were like caring for the temple. They were priests in a sense. In Psalm 84, verses 10 through 12, there's a song written by these people called the Sons of Korah. And it says this: better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tent of the wicked, dwell in Babylon. For the Lord God is a sun and shield. The Lord bestows favor and honor. No good thing does he withhold from those whose walk is blameless. Lord Almighty, blessed is the one whose trust is in you. The sons of Korah have a very interesting history. Their namesake, Korah, lived during the time of Moses, and he led a rebellion against Moses. He tried to install himself as the high priest. He didn't think Aaron was doing a good job. He was right. But all the same, he sought his own glory, even though he thought it was for God's glory. And he pays a heavy price. The ground opens up and swallows him whole and closes on top of him. He's buried alive by God. And his sons said, we have no part in that. We don't want you to remember us as that. But there was still a punishment. And they were told, look, you're Levites, you're priests, but you're not. You're going to be the janitors of the temple. You're going to be the ones who care for the grounds, who clean away the waste, toilets, or anything like that. You're going to be the ones who do the heavy lifting. Whenever people bring in their stuff to the temple, you will carry it to the altar, but you won't get to sacrifice it. You won't be a part of the priestly system in that way. That stinks. Their whole purpose in life was taken away and instead relegated to grunt workers. And yet they write, better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. I'd rather be a doorkeeper. That's the Hebrew way of saying I'd rather be the janitor than to not be here. They found the joy of serving the Lord where others would find humiliation. Where's your joy? Do you have joy this morning? If you are in the courts of God, are you joyous this morning? And if not, I can't help you. Only God can. Dwell on him, seek him, and maybe ask yourself if you've been taking some things that aren't glorifying God. As we we dismiss, I'm going to end with this. I was actually going to preach my whole sermon about this verse in Numbers, but God decided no. I'm going to send you out with the priestly blessing. We do it every week here. And as people would leave the temple, freshly atoned to God, the priest would say the same thing over them. For thousands of years, this same blessing has been prayed over people who put their trust in God, who are priests of God. May God bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May he turn his face towards you and give you peace. I'm going to pray, and then you can go. So, Father God, thank you that we are a part of your plan, that we get to be the workers of you, God, that our job is to be a priest to the nations, pointing back to you, glorifying you with our lives. Father, help us, because we are bad at our job, and we need you, and that is the only way we can do it. Father, show us what is in our sights. Convict us when what we take is for our own gain instead of your glory. And help us to be your priests to the world. Jesus, we love you and we praise you, and it's in your holy and awesome name. Amen. Sorry that was a lot of a downer, but I think there's some good stuff in there. You guys are good to go enjoy your last week without football. Be blessed, guys.